Good evening and welcome to DC Today Prime. I'm Del Walters. Anquinette Crosby will join us shortly. I don't know any Russians. I don't have any business dealings with Russia. Nobody I know has any business dealings with Russia. Those were the original statements of the man we now know as President Donald Trump. But a lot has changed in 4 years, except for one thing. There was one political pundit who got it right, and we'll talk to him in just a moment. But first, the latest. Joining us from Washington now is Professor Allan Lichtman. And Allan, thanks for being with us as always. I'm curious to get your take on the state of the political landscape right now.
You know, I have a system for predicting elections called the Keys to the White House. I haven't made a final prediction yet, but I will very soon. But I can tell you this. In late 2019, Donald Trump was looking very good for re-election on my system. He wasn't down nearly enough of the keys to predict his defeat, but obviously things have turned very sour for Donald Trump with the pandemic, the economic plunge, and the social unrest. And this is very much tied to his own lack of leadership. These are not events that came out of nowhere or could not be contained. He simply has had a failed response to every challenge of this year.
Professor, President Trump saying that it may be time to delay the election. First of all, he can't. But that being said, in your keys, was this a predictor that maybe he doesn't think he's going to win?
You know, he probably thinks he's in trouble on my economic keys. He's in trouble on my scandal key. He's in trouble on the lack of a major foreign policy success. So he's got a lot to worry about. You know, when I predicted his win in 2016, he sent me a very nice note saying, congrats, Professor, good call. But I don't think he understood the deeper meaning of my prediction in the Keys to the White House, which is that elections are based not on campaigning, but on governing. He thinks he can talk his way into re-election. He can't. He's now the incumbent, and he's going to be judged on his record.
The fact that you got this right the last time, and so many journalists got it wrong, are we making the same mistakes this time? And if so, what have we corrected?
We are making exactly the same mistakes this time. We are basing predictions on polls, and polls are not predictors for two reasons. Number one, they're snapshots that can change momentarily. And number two, they have to kind of at least make an educated guess at who the likely voters are because they don't know. And that is particularly fraught with error in this time of pandemic. That's why the Keys to the White House look at the fundamental factors of governing, not the fleeting events of the polls and the day-to-day events of the campaign.
One of the things that we often ask ourselves about presidential politics is whether the president has coattails. Does Donald Trump have coattails? And if so, are those coattails positive or negative for members of the Senate and the House?
Well, obviously, if he loses this election, he's going to have negative coattail. There's no way you can win back the House in a losing presidential campaign, and a losing presidential campaign usually spells disaster both in House and Senate elections, particularly if the losses are fairly significant. Even if he wins, though, he's certainly not going to pull a Republican House, but he may salvage the Senate.
What is the predominant factor, do you think, that will shape this fall's election?
Well, I think it's pretty clear what is on the minds of Americans, the grave hardships of this economic downturn, which is causing tremendous suffering in American households, many of whom were operating paycheck to paycheck before this happens. Of course, the pandemic, which has now, I think, exceeded 4.5 million cases, 150,000 deaths. And of course, the social unrest, the demand for racial justice. And Donald Trump seems to be impervious to all of this. He has done little or nothing to deal with the pandemic. He doesn't seem to believe, astoundingly, that there's racial injustice, and he thinks he can talk his way back into a robust economy.
Professor Lichtman, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you a personal question, which is whether you scream at the TV nowadays when you hear all of the political discourse in Washington, so stay with us.